there, welcome to the Melbourne Food Hub Urban Farm. So we're based in Alphington and we've been working on this site for around a year now. So my name's Audrey, I'm the urban farmer here, and today we're just going to go for a bit of a walk around the garden, see what's growing, explain some of the different techniques we're using to grow food on this site, which is ex-landfill. So everything has had to be raised above ground, so we'll be looking at how we've managed to achieve that. And just giving some general tips and advice for new gardeners on how to start growing food in your own garden. So let's go for a walk and have a look at what's growing. So these beds are our raised wicking beds. We built these about almost a year ago now with help from Reservoir High School students and volunteers at wicking bed workshops, and yeah, they've been working really well. If you want to come a bit closer, we can see how they work. They're basically a type of raised bed that has a kind of inbuilt watering solution in there. So we've lined the whole bed with a food-safe plastic and then filled up the bottom half of the bed with scoria. You can also use gravel as long as it's quite small, and that acts as a water reservoir. So you fill up your bed by putting your hose in here, and you know if it's full because this handy water indicator will be full as well. And yeah, once the bed's full, it waters the plants from below, so the water actually wicks upwards through the soil, and what that means is you get a lot less evaporation than top watering. You also use a lot less water, up to 50 to 80% more depending on which studies you're looking at. So they're a really great solution in our drought-stricken country, and yeah, they've been really fantastic in this kind of situation where it's a community urban farm, so we don't have someone here watering every day or being able to check drip irrigation, so they're quite low maintenance. So often people say that root veggies aren't a great crop selection for wicking beds due to the the soil being quite moist. A lot of the time they can be prone to getting waterlogged and having roots rotting prematurely and just not growing to their full size. We haven't actually found that to be a problem here. We've just been making sure to let the water levels fully drop in the wicking beds before filling them up. And yeah, we've been growing carrots quite successfully. Yeah, so we've got some baby carrots available at the moment that are going into our weekly veg boxes, and in a few more weeks these carrots will be full size. So yeah, they've been loving it. And yeah, definitely leafy greens, particularly salad, really good choice for wicking beds because they are quite heat sensitive and need quite a lot of moisture so they don't bolt to seed. So as you can see, yeah, this lettuce is growing really well. So with carrots, they can be a bit of a tricky crop to grow if you're new to gardening, just because the germination phase can be quite long, and the seeds need to be kept moist from the second you plant them basically until you can start to see the seeds, the plants growing. So a good way to make sure that you have success with your germination is to keep the soil covered with some moist hessian sacks. So these are just old coffee sacks that we got for free. You can water the soil after you plant, and then just keep watering the hessian, and that moisture, that barrier just keeps the moisture in the soil. And then you can keep having a look. So these are planted a few days ago, so no sign of anything yet, but in a few days to a week we should start to see little seedlings germinating. Cool, so as you can see we've got lots of flowers and herbs growing amongst our veggies, and that's not only for aesthetic purposes, it's also to help us manage pests in the garden and to attract beneficial insects and pollinators. So this cute looking white butterfly that looks quite delightful from a distance is actually a very notorious pest. It's the white cabbage butterfly, and they are responsible for laying little eggs on lots of crops. They particularly love brassicas like your broccolis and cauliflowers, which are being planted right now. So if you ever see little green caterpillars growing on your crops, these are the guys that are responsible, and those pests can be quite destructive to crops, so we do need to manage them. And one way of doing that is attracting beneficial insects like parasitic wasps, so they prey on caterpillars as well as aphids and a bunch of other pest insects. They're tiny little wasps that you can't see, and their mouths are so small that they need very small flowers to feed on, so it's really good to have a variety of different flowering crops planted in the garden that'll be flowering every month of the year to be attracting beneficial insects. Ladybugs also are really helpful kind of like a superhero bug really in the garden that help to keep pests under control. Yeah, there's studies that show that a single ladybug can eat 50 aphids a day, or up to 5,000 in their life. Yes, your face, that's the kind of shock and amazement we want to see. So ladybugs need flowers to feed on, so yeah, we've just been planting lots of different flowers around the garden. Oh, hi! So on the theme of wicking beds, these fruit tree crates are also a type of wicking bed that we have used water ups. So these are cells made from recycled plastic. Basically they work the same as your regular wicking beds, but instead of using scoria, you put these in as your water reservoir. You could actually achieve a similar thing if you're on a low budget with old seedling pots just turned upside down, if you can imagine. So that just acts as a water reservoir, and you need to encase them in a waterproof barrier like plastic, or we were lucky enough to have these old plastic tubs, if you can see, that we've just plugged up the drainage holes that were in them with silicone, and then installed these in the bottom. So we fit into one of these beds, and then you just need to have your water inlet here and your overflow over here. So that's where the excess water comes out, so that you don't get a build-up of water, which would lead to the trees becoming waterlogged. So yeah, we're going to be planting a bunch of different companion plants around the base of the fruit trees to help with pollination and with pest issues, but so far they've been growing really well. So this is our larger garden area. So we've got 16 rows at 8 metres each, and yeah, because of the nature of the site, so it was an old tip site, so we're working with contaminated soil, so we've had to build up everything above ground. So these beds are actually also wicking beds despite not looking like it. So what we've done here, we've used the water up cells again, and we built little wooden frames in the ground, lined them with plastic, installed the cells, and then we've just mounted our soil on top. So that's given us a depth of like around 35 centimetres for our veggies to grow in, and a constant water supply in the bottom of the beds. So we're still getting quite a lot of cucumbers and zucchinis at the moment. Hard to keep up with them really. So here we've got some beetroot planted. This is a good example of succession planting. So if you've been on our website recently, you might have seen some of the intro to gardening articles that we've put up, where we're focused on how to make sure you can have a supply of veggies to harvest year round. And so a good technique is succession planting, which essentially means rather than planting all of your crops all at once, you can stage it and just keep planting every few weeks, so that you've got something ripening all the time. So for example, we planted this beetroot row, and you can see they've grown a lot bigger than this row, which we planted 3 or 4 weeks later. So once we start harvesting this row and that starts running out, these will be ready to start harvesting. And in another week or so we're going to plant the next row, and so on. So in that way we can make sure we've got veggies coming in all the time. We've noticed that some of our beds are mulched with straw while some of them aren't. We, in general, over the summer months particularly, or any time that it's warm, we like to keep our beds mulched with some kind of organic matter, because it helps to keep moisture in the soil, and it also adds nutrients back to the bed. So as it decomposes, it's adding organic matter, which feeds the plants and helps to build up the carbon in the soil, and feed the soil life, which is really important for growing healthy crops. So if you come a bit closer, you can see that if we dig down, that soil is really nice and moist and rich with lots of organic matter. So yeah, composting and mulching is really important. But in winter in Melbourne, because it does get quite cool, it's nice to remove the mulch for a bit to let the sun hit the soil below and warm it up, because straw can be quite insulating, which is great for keeping the soil cool in summer, but it can keep it a bit too cool in winter. So yeah, we've been using straw that we're lucky enough to get from our neighbours, the Mushroomery and Sporadical Mushrooms, 2 organic mushroom farms. And if you can see here, there's actually still some little oyster mushrooms growing from the mulch, which is a great little bonus. Yeah, for those of you who may not have gardened before, we'll do a little demo of how to plant a seedling. So yeah, once you've prepared your bed, added some compost, loosened it up, you can just make a little hole. If you've got compacted soil, just break it up a little bit with your hands, remove any large bits, Get your seedling, in this case silver beet, make a little hole, just plonk it in, and you put your soil around like that. And then you want to compact it a little bit just to make this make sure the plant's going to stay nice and firm, but not too much, because you still want water and air and the roots to be able to grow through the soil quite easily. So we don't want to push it down too firm. And then we'll water that in, maybe give it a feed with some seaweed solution or worm juice if you have it, and yeah, sit back and watch them grow. So while we're here, we may as well talk a little bit about weeds. So I get asked a lot by people that are new to gardening about weeding. It seems like that's the thing a lot of people are really anxious about with growing a garden, is how much time you're going to spend weeding. And I'm here to tell you that weeds are not the enemy. So obviously if we're growing crops to eat for our families, or particularly like here we're growing crops to sell, so we need to make sure that we're not having weeds compete with the things that we're trying to grow. But if they're not competing with our crops, then we do, to a degree, depending on the weed, let them grow where they are. And if I do want to pull them out because they're competing with things, I'll pull things out. And unless they're a plant that's going to grow from the roots, I'll just leave them in place to break down where they are, because all of the nutrients that these weeds have pulled up in their roots will then be returned to the soil. Alternatively, you can just add that to the compost, and and the same thing will happen. So here we've got actually quite a good selection of weeds that are edible or useful in other ways. So one of my favourites is this delicate little weed here, chickweed. So chickweed's actually edible. It's really nice in salads. You can use the stems and the leaves and just chop that up finely. Use it in salads. It's often used a lot in making ointments as well. It's really soothing for irritated skin, so you'll find it often as an ingredient in herbal skin creams. And another one of my other favourites, actually these are all my favourites, fat hen. So fat hen is super delicious weed. If you cook it up with oil or butter in a fry pan, it's exactly like spinach. You can use it in the same way, and it's really nutritious. Similarly with mallow, you can also cook it up and use it like spinach, but mallow is quite mucusy, so it has a lot of mucilage, which means that, which sounds very fancy, but it basically just means it's slimy. So you can use it to thicken up stews or soups. And last but not least, we have nettle, or stinging nettle, as it's also known for, if you can see these brutal looking little spikes down here, which do sting a lot if you touch them. So it's good to harvest nettle with gloves on. But yeah, despite the vicious looking appearance, nettle can be a really great food source as well. If you cook it well, you can steam it or boil it, or even fry it, or just cook it really well, and that will deactivate the spines. And then it's incredibly nutritious, really high in lots of trace minerals and nutrients, and particularly a really good source of iron. So a lot of these plants are good indicators of soil quality, and so yeah, particularly if you're starting a new garden, it can be helpful to look around and see what weeds are growing and do a bit of research as to what that indicates about the kind of soil that you have. So for example, some weeds prefer to grow in compacted soil or waterlogged soil, do we have any purslane? We've got some purslane over there growing, and that really likes dry soil, so that can be a good way of figuring out what you're working with. And weeds, yeah, I should mention, have a really important role to play in restoring soil. Not all, obviously there's a lot of harmful weeds that are a threat to our native ecosystems, but particularly in a garden situation, a lot of these weeds are helpful, particularly something like nettle. So it's known as a dynamic accumulator, which basically means that it has roots that grow down and take up certain nutrients that other plants can't access, and it stores them in the leaves. And so if you cut back that weed or just pull it out and leave it in place, as it decomposes, it releases those nutrients back into the soil, making them available for the plants growing nearby. So yeah, if you manage weeds well, they can be adding organic matter to your soil and kind of feeding your plants in situ.
So hopefully this video's inspired you to get growing at home if you're not already. So some of the faster growing veggies that you can plant now and be harvesting within the next 4 to 6 weeks include things like rocket, radishes, Asian greens like mizuna, bok choy, all your lettuces and salad greens, coriander, turnips, and even things like kale and silver beet. And then slightly longer growing crops that'll keep you fed all through winter that can be planted now include things like carrots, beetroots, broccoli, cauliflower, cabbages, swedes, and broad bean. And it's also a great time to start putting in your alliums like garlic, leeks and onions. And if you're looking for any more information or gardening tips, feel free to jump on our website, melbournefoodhub.org.au. So until next time, thanks for watching and happy gardening.